Please be seated. I can remember the experience as if it were yesterday, even though it was nearly 30 years ago. When Willow and I first met, we were poor college students living in downtown Chicago. What we lacked in resources, we made up for in zest. Zest for discovery, for adventure, and for possibility. With little money and no clearly defined purpose, we used to walk for miles all around Chicago whenever we weren't in class or working. We'd peer into windows and dream about lives unfolding behind them. Often, our wandering was guided by hunger, on the lookout for food that was both affordable and interesting. One afternoon in Lincoln Park, we stumbled upon a small Persian restaurant called Parr's Cove. I was delighted this morning when I Googled to find out it still exists, one of the rare restaurants that made it through COVID. From the sidewalk, we looked in through the window at the dining room that felt quietly luminous. I say quietly because no one was in there. And there were 10 small tables draped in white tablecloths, flickering candlelight, but a simple, unmistakable elegance. And then we looked at the menu card posted outside and realized that this was well beyond our price point. We turned to leave, but a man behind the open kitchen design caught sight of us, and he waved us in enthusiastically. Embarrassed by our circumstances and suspicious of this enthusiasm, we smiled politely and tried to retreat. But this old guy was quick. He was at the door before we could even turn around, and his earnest hospitality leaving little room for our refusal. Against our better judgment, we entered. Before we could really sit down and look at the menu, he had placed a plate of hummus and warmed pita in front of us. A gift, he said. The whole evening seemed to twinkle with that kind of quiet magic, and our anxiety about money began to dissolve. He insisted on ordering for us, assuring us that the prefixed menu for two, which we had just enough money to cover, would be the perfect choice. And that night, we feasted on flavor and grazed on grace. Plate after plate appeared, far beyond the 3 courses advertised. We were given far more food than we could pay for. Materially, yes, but also even more so in dignity. We left eager to return, afraid that experience might never again repeat itself. But when you encounter something so real, something so true, your heart burns with the need to say, "Come and see." You just have to share it. So when my parents visited, we brought them. And the grace of the proprietor, Max Parr's, even extended to my father's insistence that his food be served plain without that sauce. His generosity was patient enough to calm the nerves of an embarrassed and frustrated son as well. Once again, we all left testifying to the place's singular goodness. I wonder if you've ever had an experience like that. I'm not talking just about a restaurant experience, but an opportunity where a moment somehow exceeded your expectations, somehow, and yet made you feel entirely at home. An experience of being seen, not through the lens of your own self-identified brokenness or brokenness, but through the promise of who you might become. Where someone's gracious regard enlarged your spirit and allowed you to stand a little bit taller. I wonder if you can think of such a moment. I imagine all of us have had one time or another. Of course, our families routinely offer this to us. Parents know they do it. Children do not perceive it at all and can rarely appreciate it. So maybe the person that you're thinking of that saw you was a teacher, or maybe a preacher, a police officer, or maybe a stranger in your life. whatever the case can be, I'm sure you can remember that moment of being seen, of feeling a sense of belonging, not only in the moment, but a belonging to yourself. These small, seemingly isolated moments shape the character of our lives. They teach us how to believe in ourselves. They give us courage to extend the same grace to others. I sometimes rediscover that dreamy luminosity that I felt in those early days of Chicago when I read John's Gospel. It is filled with magical kind of ordinariness that looks like our lives, I think, sometimes. In this one this morning, there's an eager, almost tender simplicity that I find beguiling. It happens like almost accidentally. John the Baptist is standing where he always stands, doing what he always does, teaching, testifying, gathering earnest young seekers around himself. These are not polished men. They're restless, hungry, living close to the edge of their own becoming. They followed John because he helped them name their discontent and believe that something, anything more was possible. And then Jesus walks by. John watches him pass and says almost offhandedly, "Look, here's the Lamb of God," as you'd normally do. And then that's it. No recruitment pitch, no explanation, just pointing. And the two disciples do something reckless, awkward, maybe downright disloyal. They leave one religious leader in the midst of mid-stride to follow another down the road. I'm pausing to see if anyone's going to get up and leave during the sermon and find a better one. All right. I imagine that it's the same uncertain energy that they have as they set out, that Will and I felt standing outside Parrs Cove, hovering between longing and embarrassment, knowing we don't quite belong, but not yet able to walk away. The disciples follow at this distance, unsure of how this works, really. Is this even allowed? Is there a script for this? Jesus finally turns and sees them and catches them in the act. And he says, "What are you looking for?" It's an honest question and a dangerous one. They could have said 100 different things. Certainty, purpose, liberation, a future. Instead, what comes out is wonderfully clumsy and human. "Rabbi, where are you staying?" That's not a theological question. It's not a confession of faith. Just curiosity. Just proximity. Just the hope that wherever he might be, close enough to touch, that they could follow. And Jesus does not correct them. He does not screen them like an HR professional or warn them about the cost of discipleship. He simply says, "Come and see. Come and see." And they do. They step inside. They see where he stays. And somehow, without fanfare, they remain. It's late afternoon, the hour when you usually start thinking about heading home because, again, grumbling stomachs. But they linger. One conversation leads to another. The ordinary stretches out into the luminous. And they are given more than they expected, more than they paid for. One of them, Andrew, just can't keep it to himself. And so he runs off to find his brother. "We've found him," he says, breathless, almost incredulous. "The Messiah. Can you believe it?" And Simon comes along too, skeptical but willing. When Jesus sees him, he does what the Persian restaurateur did so effortlessly. He sees not just Simon who is, but Simon who might become. "You are Simon," he says, "son of John, but you will be called Cephas," Peter, rock, bedrock. A new name, a new future, spoken before Simon has done one single worthy thing. And this is how John begins the gospel, not with doctrine, but with discovery, with wandering young men willing to risk leaving what they know for what they cannot yet name, with an invitation that still echoes today: come and see. So I wonder this morning, what are you looking for? Perhaps you can still taste that youthful hunger for discovery, that ache that once drew you out into the world without a map, without a safety net. What desire is quietly burning in your heart right now? What are you looking for? What do you hope to find? I've been lingering with this intimate exchange between Jesus and these early, still unformed followers. Uninvited, they trail behind. And when he turns and asks them what they want, they offer not an answer, but indeed another question. Where are you going? Where are you staying? It's a strangely disarming response. And what unsettles me most is this morning, the gospel never answers that question. It doesn't say where Jesus went. It only says, come and see. John leaves that question open. And so we're left to imagine, where would Jesus be staying in the first century of Palestine? Where would Jesus be staying today? This is the question that quietly burns in our heart. Not only where did Jesus stay then, but where he stays now. If I wanted to take him seriously, if I wanted to follow that invitation to come and see, where might I actually go today? Where is Jesus staying? I have some instincts, and they trouble me. I'm fairly certain that he wouldn't be at the Vatican. I'm pretty certain that he would not be staying in the White House or a governor's mansion. He would not be perched in a penthouse overlooking Wall Street. And I doubt he'd be tucked in a comfortable cul-de-sac in the suburbs, or even living at 311 Crossman Street in the rectory. The pastor and theologian Howard Thurman offers a clearer compass. Thurman insists that Jesus lives with the disinherited, those whose backs are against the wall, those for whom religion has often been used not as a shelter, but as a weapon. Jesus abides among people stripped of power, stripped of dignity, lacking certainty, and yet still stubbornly alive with hope. If we ask where Jesus is staying, Thurman says, we look where life is most fragile, and therefore most real, where people are hungry not only for bread, but for recognition, where hospitality is not curated, but costly, and where grace is not abstract, but practiced, one meal, one name, one act of recognition and seeing at a time. Which means that come and see is not a sentimental invitation. It's a risky one. It asks us to step out of what is polished and protected and to go into places that might unsettle us. Places where we cannot afford to remain untouched. Just like those first disciples, just like two broken college kids standing awkwardly outside a restaurant they feared they didn't belong in. And yet, that is where the feast begins. That is where belonging happens. Not with answers neatly supplied, but with a willingness to follow curiosity, to risk embarrassment, to cross a threshold, trusting that on the other side, there might be more grace than we can even imagine, and more of ourselves willing to emerge and to be named. Tomorrow, we mark the life and witness of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And I find myself quietly wondering, Do we still believe in his dream? Do we still dare to dream ourselves? Do we still believe in civil rights? The question may sound rhetorical, but it isn't, because these commitments are no longer assured or assumed. They're contested, fragile, and in dispute. There are countless, mostly nameless people who have fled death, violence, and collapse in their own nations, believing in the America that we have so boldly proclaimed ourselves to be, a nation called itself as a light to the other nations, that God's salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. They came seeking safety, dignity, and the possibility of new beginnings. And many of them have discovered here the very injustices they fled: suspicion instead of welcome, precarity instead of protection, a lack of rights where rights are promised and due. They encounter systems that profit from their labor while denying their humanity. It feels to me that we are living in a profoundly vulnerable moment as a nation. We're afraid. We're afraid of each other. We're afraid of difference. Most of all, we're afraid of the hard and holy work of making community again, of encountering the true humanity and humility of our own stories and the stories of those we meet. Our own security is driving us into this place of national insecurity. And when fear takes hold, it tempts us to trade responsibility for control, solidarity for security, and sometimes even to give up our own rights for the illusion of security and safety. Which brings us back once more to that question that will not let us go: where is Jesus staying? Because when we look honestly at our world, the answer becomes unsettling. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus gave us a clue. Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Jesus is not staying where power is most secure. He is not sheltered by empire. He is not insulated by privilege. I could have concluded each of those sentences with this phrase: as we are, but I didn't, because you know it. We have security, we have shelter, and we have privilege. Jesus is staying among the unhoused, the displaced, the disinherited, with those who are still wandering, still hoping, still asking whether there is room for them in the story we tell about ourselves. To ask, where is Jesus staying, is not a question about geography. It's a question about allegiance and discipleship, about whether we're willing to follow him out of comfort and into costly solidarity, and to create real belonging, real community, real belovedness. It's a question about whether we still believe that every human life bears divine dignity, or only those who look like us and speak like us and vote like us. We're in a moment of great division. This is not about singling out one side or the other. This is about getting to our base humanity of who we're called to be, to understand our dignity of everybody, and to hold tight to that. Dr. King believed the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, but only because people are willing to place their hands on it and lean into it. Jesus invites us to come and see, not a dream safely preserved, but a way of life that must be chosen again and again. And perhaps this is the invitation before us today. Not to commemorate courage from a distance, but to ask with honesty and humility whether we're willing to follow Christ to the places where he actually abides. Because that is where the feast is. That is where the work begins. That is how we create community. That's how we find our own belovedness in the face of the other. This is real work. It's It's difficult. It's hard to speak about. But it's the truth that God speaks to us. Come and follow me in the way that lays down and doesn't try and hold and possess, but gives away. Come and see. Amen. Standing in body and spirit.